People keep talking about Alex Ayala's ranking. The climb, the seeding, the next opponent she's about to face. All of that's real, and all of that matters. But there's a second number sitting right next to it that almost nobody's looking at. And it might be telling a more honest version of this story than the ranking ever could. Her prize money for the season just crossed $1.6 million. Most of that landed in the last 6 weeks. Say that number out loud and it sounds like a headline someone rounded up to make it sexier. It isn't. It's what actually hit her account. Round by round, tournament by tournament, against opponents who were trying just as hard to stop her from cashing that check. And the speed of it should stop you, because prize money on this tour doesn't usually move like this. It creeps, a little here, a little there, spread out evenly across a long season, the same way a paycheck builds for anyone showing up to work every week. So the interesting question isn't how much she's made, it's what broke the normal pace. 6 weeks ago, this number wasn't anywhere near exploding. It looked like every other total on the tour, climbing quietly in the background while everyone watched the standings instead. To see how strange this jump really is, you have to go back to where the number was sitting before any of it started. And you need 30 seconds on how this whole system of getting paid actually works, because that's what makes the jump so unusual in the first place. WTA prize money isn't handed out for being popular, and it's not handed out for potential. It's mechanical. Every round of every tournament pays a fixed amount, the same number for whoever reaches that stage. Camera on them or not. Win the match, you move up a tier. Lose, and that's your number for the week. Done. No negotiation. No bonus for style points. Think about how a ranking works for a second, by comparison. A ranking can jump because of one great week, then sit there, propped up by points that are already starting to fade before the next tournament begins. Prize money doesn't get that kind of shortcut. It only grows when you keep winning, tournament after tournament, month after month, all season long. It's the less glamorous number on the stat page. It's also the one that's much harder to fake. Before Wimbledon, Alex's total for the entire 2026 season sat at $871,438. That's a genuinely solid number for a young player having a good year. Nobody wrote a single headline about it. It was building quietly in a stat column. Nobody outside the sport ever checks, the kind of number that only agents and tax accountants pay attention to. You can watch that quiet build happen match by match if you're patient enough to go looking. Back in January, her Australian Open main draw appearance paid $100,760. A round of 16 finish at Indian Wells added another $105,720. Small jumps, one after another, the kind that add up over months without ever trending anywhere. That's what a normal season looks like. Steady, a little unremarkable, even when the tennis itself is good. By the usual math, that total should have kept crawling upward the same slow way it always had. A first-round check here, a second-round check there. The unremarkable rhythm of a full season on tour. Instead, it nearly doubled in 6 weeks. Not across a full year. 6 weeks. That's the part worth pausing on, because a jump like that doesn't come from steady, expected progress. You don't nearly double a season's earnings by playing the same level of tennis you were playing in March. Something had to break the pattern, and 3 things broke it. One right after another, close enough together that the total barely had time to settle before the next one landed on top of it. 3 tournaments. 3 separate paydays, each bigger than the last. By the time the third one hit, the number wasn't just higher. It had moved into territory nobody expected her to reach this early in her career. If you've been watching her matches without ever glancing at the money side of this sport, this is probably the moment the story starts looking a little different than it did 20 seconds ago. One quick one before we get into those 3 moments. Guess which of them moved the number the most, and drop it in the comments. Most people get this wrong, and it isn't the one with the trophy attached to it. The answer says something interesting about how this sport quietly pays out, and it's not what the headlines usually focus on. Wimbledon is where the pattern actually breaks, and it's strange this wasn't the headline on its own. She made a run to the 4th round. Best Grand Slam result of her career, by a wide margin, and that single tournament paid her $401,022. One event. Read that again. $401,000 from one tournament in roughly 2 weeks. Compare that against the number from a minute ago. 6.5 months of tennis, from January through June, every tournament combined, added up to $871,000. One Wimbledon run came close to matching half of that total by itself, in the time it takes to play 7 matches. That's not the number creeping the way it usually does. That's the number lurching sideways all at once. And it didn't stop there. It barely paused. There wasn't really a gap to catch a breath in, which is unusual. On its own, most breakout runs get followed by at least one quiet week where a player's body or her ranking anxiety catches up with her. Hers didn't. 3 weeks later, in Washington, she won her first WTA Tour title, beat the top seed in the final, took home the champion's check, $252,000. Add that to everything else, and her season total crossed $1,537,330. Right there. That's the exact tournament, the exact week, where the number in this video's title actually happened. Not an estimate, not a figure someone rounded to make a thumbnail pop. The real total. On the real day, it crossed 1.5 million. Here's what's a little strange, though. Almost everyone who watched that final saw the trophy. Far fewer people clocked that it was also the financial turning point of her season. Same match. 2 completely different stories happening inside it, and only one made the highlight reel. The final itself is worth a beat, too. Not the tactics, just the shape of it. She lost the first set. That's usually where a title run quietly ends for a player at this stage of her career, especially against a top seed who's been in finals like this before. Instead, she won the next 2 sets without much resistance at all. The kind of finish that doesn't just win a title, it changes how the rest of the tour looks at you walking into the next tournament. Then Toronto. Quieter than Washington. No trophy, no slow-motion celebration shot. Just a 4th-round finish, tucked behind whatever bigger match was happening on center court that day. But rounds still pay. Whether anyone's watching or not, whether it trends or not. That run added $81,800, pushing the season total to $1,619,130. 3 tournaments, 6 weeks. Somewhere inside that stretch, without a single headline calling it out directly, her season prize money nearly doubled. None of these were freak results, either, and that's the part that should genuinely land. No walkover to a final. No miracle run through a draw that fell apart around her. Every dollar came against real seeds, real depth, opponents who show up in these brackets every week expecting to win. So the dollar total, big as it already looks, isn't actually the most interesting part of this story. Go back to right before Washington. Before any of that title money landed, Alex was sitting at number 22 on the entire season's money list. Not bad. But not the story anyone was telling yet, either. The gap between her and the top 20 wasn't some enormous canyon you'd need 3 tournaments to close. It was $165,606. Basically 1 good week away. Now look at who was sitting just ahead of her on that list. A player with total season earnings of $1,621,374. Same neighborhood as Alex's number, close enough that you'd assume they got there the same way. Except most of that total, $1,153,853 of it, came from doubles. That single detail changes how you should read these 2 totals side by side. 2 players, similar numbers on paper. One built almost that entire figure playing alongside a partner, splitting the workload, splitting the pressure, splitting the credit when it goes well and the blame when it doesn't. The other built hers almost entirely alone. 1 match at a time, 1 opponent at a time, nowhere to hide if things went wrong out there, and nobody to lean on when they did. That's Alex's number, nearly all singles. Picture what that actually means for a moment. Every check on that list came from a court where there was no partner covering the other half of the baseline, nobody to share the pressure with when a 3rd set got tight. Just her, on one side of the net, tournament after tournament. It's rarer than it sounds for a player at this stage of a breakout. Most rising players lean on doubles a little, partly for reps, partly because it's an easy way to pad a season total, while the singles ranking is still catching up. She skipped that safety net almost entirely. Every check on this list came from matches where losing meant walking off alone, no partner to share the result with either way. There's something a little ironic in that, too. The cleaner number, the one with almost nothing padding it, belongs to the 21-year-old who wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this list yet. But that's what the numbers say once you stop looking at the total and start looking at where it came from. A big total built mostly off doubles does tell you something real about a player. Good chemistry with a partner. Good at reading a court that's suddenly half as big to defend. That's a genuine skill. Nobody's taking it away from anyone. But a total built almost entirely off singles tells you something different. Every dollar of it came from her standing alone on one side of the net for every set of every match, of every tournament that got her to this point on the list. That distinction is easy to miss glancing at a leaderboard, comparing 2 similar-looking totals. But it's the difference between she's having a good year and she's doing this the hard way, entirely on her own racket, and still climbing. Once you notice that, the whole season total stops looking like a hot streak that happened to her. it starts looking like something she's building on purpose. One match at a time, with no partner to absorb a bad day for her. One more thing before we keep going. If you've been enjoying her matches without ever thinking about the business side of this sport, that's normal, most people don't. But it's usually where the more interesting story is hiding. Drop a comment with whichever number surprised you the most so far. It helps to know which parts actually land. If that reframe just changed how you're thinking about her season, hold on to that feeling, because it's about to get stranger. The money side of this story doesn't stop at this season. It goes back much further, and the further back you go, the less this number behaves like a normal career. Zoom out past this season, and these figures stop being impressive and start being almost absurd. Her total career prize money, counting up through right after Wimbledon, sat at $2,235,123. That number kept climbing after that, through Washington, through Toronto, through Cincinnati. A career total built by someone who's still only 21, who turned pro not that long ago, in 2020. Here's a comparison that puts it in perspective, and it's the kind of detail that doesn't show up on a stat page. You have to go looking for it. Back in 2024, Alex won an ITF title in Spain, a place called Vitoria-Gasteiz. Total prize money for that entire tournament, every round, every player combined, winners and first-round exits alike, was $100,000. One tournament this year, one single Wimbledon run, paid her 4 times that, not 4 times her share of it. 4 times the entire pool that used to get split across a whole draw of players just 2 years ago. That gap isn't small. That's not a player who slowly worked her way up a pay scale one rung at a time. That's a player who crossed into a completely different tier of the sport in about 24 months, the kind of jump that usually takes a full career, not 2 seasons. Then there's Cincinnati, which is where the statement win in this video's title comes from. Round of 64, against a player named Elena Gabriela Rus. Alex won it 6-1, 3-love, before Rus had to retire with an injury partway through the second set. It wasn't just a win, it was one of the most dominant stretches of tennis she's put together all season, the kind of scoreline that makes an opponent's retirement almost beside the point. There's something almost funny about how understated that match looked from the outside. No dramatic comeback, no third set battle, nothing that trends on its own. Just a scoreline that ends in a retirement, the kind of result that gets one line in a recap and nothing more. But financially, it did exactly what a proper statement win is supposed to do. It kept the number moving, at a moment when the number itself is worth more than it's ever been, and that timing matters more than it might seem. Total prize money at this year's Cincinnati Open jumped 44% from last year, up to $7,433,076 for the women's draw alone. The champion's check now sits at $1,085,220, which means every round Alex wins right now is worth noticeably more than that same round would have paid 12 months ago. Same tournament, same draw size, same number of matches to get through, just bigger checks waiting at every stage along the way. Put these 3 pieces next to each other, and the picture gets clear fast. This isn't one story, it's 3 stories stacked on top of each other. The prize money isn't just growing because she's winning more matches, though she is. It's growing because she's winning more matches at the exact moment the sport itself is paying out bigger numbers than it used to, while doing almost all of that winning in singles. The one format that pays out to exactly one person and nobody else. Any one of those 3 things alone would make a decent story. A young player improving. A tour paying more money overall. A player who skips the double safety net entirely. All 3 happening at once, in the same 6-week stretch, is how a season total nearly doubles before anyone notices. Cincinnati isn't even finished yet. Her next opponent is Amanda Anisimova, a top 10 player, and a real jump in competition from anyone she's faced in this tournament so far. Different level of return depth, different pressure on serve, the kind of opponent who tests whether a run like this has real substance behind it or whether it built against softer draws. If she gets through that match, the number climbs again, right up to the doorstep of the US Open. The US Open matters here for more than prestige. It's the richest tournament of the year, the one event on the calendar where a single good run can add more to a season total than most players make across several months combined. Whatever number she's carrying into New York has real room to move again, and fast. So here's the question actually worth asking, and it isn't the one the headline already answered. It isn't whether she crossed 1.5 million she did that weeks ago now, quietly, without much fanfare, and the real number already sits well above it. The real question is how high this goes by the time the season ends in December. Does she close the gap into the top 20 money earners of the year, a list that, up until a few months ago, felt completely out of reach for a player from a country with essentially zero history at this level of the sport. No prior top 20 finisher to point to. No blueprint. Just her, building one from scratch. Tournament by tournament. 1.5 million was the number that got you to click on this video. By the time the season's actually over, there's a real chance it won't be the biggest figure attached to her name. So make an actual prediction, not the safe one. Does she crack that top 20 list before December? Or does the pace cool once the competition in front of her gets consistently tougher than anything she's faced so far? Put a real number in the comments, not just a yes she will. Let's see who's paying close enough attention to call this one before the season ends.